I am very deeply honored to be here for many reasons. Potential Plus has given us so much, and Denise has become a personal friend. And it is an absolute delight to be able to give back to what I think of as the community, as it were. It's called Misbehaving Parents and Responsive Children, because children will respond to we're all human, we're human mammals, it's easy to forget that. But the animal mammalian nature of us and our children actually plays very large. We are social creatures, and we learn how to be social in relationship. So our children are responding to our parenting to a great degree. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background, some typical and often poorly done behavior management, but very well intentioned by parents. The kinds of things that gifted children, higher learning potential children will experience. Look through what makes children misbehave. We're going to talk about parenting styles, reactive and proactive parenting, a brief introduction to a happy family blueprint, and I wanted to give you, I've got 5 slides, 10 top Neuro-Linguistic Programming tips, and we'll talk about why Neuro-Linguistic Programming is so awesome. So I've been a Potential Plus member since 2011 with my family. It feels like longer though, because I've had such a massive positive impact on our lives. My daughter is soon to be 10, she's Aaliyah, and you're sure to see her bouncing around during the course of the weekend. My PhD is in psychology specifically, and have an expertise on developmental, on children's development, shall I say. I'm working on a well-being policy for our daughter's school. I'm an attachment theory specialist as well, and I have expertise in both severe trauma and happy relationships. They actually went together more than you might think. Okay, parenting higher learning potential versus regular kids. Parenting issues are the same. We get this helpless little creature, and we have to shepherd them into independence as an adult. But for children with higher learning potential, it's just more intense, more in your face, more up there, more challenging, more constant, more relentless. Ringing any bells? Higher learning potential kids tend to be more independent. They tend to be much more emotionally sensitive, to the point sometimes of being unstable, and they seem less resilient, but they're struggling more with a lot more information than other kids are struggling with. They push boundaries more, but it's not about disrespect, it's an academic exercise. Like if you say, especially to like a younger child, don't touch that fragile thing on the mantelpiece, and they go, okay, what about that thing? Because they're working out sets. They're not trying to be disrespectful, they're just trying to work out what you mean and where the boundaries are. So, and we do this with exploration. You know, like babies stick things in their mouths, you know, kids touch. They ask tougher questions early on about inappropriate subjects. They'll notice where you're inconsistent, and they will name and shame it gleefully. They'll have metaphysical questions, often earlier on. And because they think about death earlier, because of more involved with metaphysical things, they have worse nightmares earlier on more often. Anyone have, yeah, a few are raising hands. Our daughter certainly did as well. Very common. It's a subtle thing. It's almost like dyslexia has a very wide impact. Same issue with higher learning potential. Typical behavior management, again, very well intentioned, but goes awry. Things like, you can't do that, and we'll be talking about the parenting strategy that falls into. Punishment, and I know go to the naughty step can be very, not around punishment, but around trying to encourage mindfulness. But it can also be, go to the naughty step, or you're grounded for a week. It could be appealing to common sense. It's, well, these kids are more logical, can't we just do that? But unless it's within a context, it won't quite work. Or worse, submitting. Oh, well, and this can happen as well. Sometimes children can be so bright, so off the scale, that the parent can be kind of intimidated by the child's intelligences. And so that can have a knock-on effect throughout the parenting that doesn't need to be there. Other times it'd be, well, you know, they're so stubborn, I may as well not try. Or whatever, I'm just too busy, I'm overwhelmed, I've got other things to do. So there are 4 different styles of parenting. Now, some of you may have seen me present before, so I wanted, instead of giving you more cutting-edge stuff, I wanted to give you the classics. This research is from the 60s, and it's been validated over and over and over again. The 4 styles are authoritative. We're going to call it democratic because it's more distinctive from authoritarian. The democratic is more cooperative and warm. Authoritarian is what it says on the tin, really, more do what I say sort of thing. The permissive is much less boundary. A democratic and authoritarian are more boundary, permissive and uninvolved, withholding, as less boundaries around. And all of these slides, by the way, will be up on our website, Wellbeing for Schools, in about 1 week, 2 weeks, Sasha?
A week.
Pardon?
A week.
Within a week, he promised. And these are based on observations of 100 preschool children. Again, this has been revalidated over and over again. Over 4 axes: disciplinary strategies, warmth and nurturance, communication styles, and expectations of maturity and control that are age appropriate or not. So a little bit more about them. The democratic parent is more likely to say things like, well, I'm asking you to do X and here's why. So they explain it. Or, what do you think? Let's get you involved in what I'm asking you to do. And there's a responsiveness, there's an involvement, a respect of the child's voice and growing sense of self. And the basic message is, I want you to grow up self-assured, self-regulating, mature and independent. Be able to speak your mind in the world. The authoritarian top-down style, because I say so. How many of you had that growing up? Yeah, quite a few. There's a lot of fear under that. It's that fear that you're going to rebel against me, so I need to control you. Never works well. And the underlying message, unfortunately, is even though I may not need to, I'm raising you not to think about yourself, not to think too much for yourself, not to be assertive, because the training is in obedience. The advantages of having a democratic, authoritative parenting style. So these are quotes from, I forgot to put the reference in. When children perceive their parents' requests as fair, they're more likely to do it. Isn't that the same for people of any age? Yeah? And then secondly, it's internalized. It's very important. There's a book in the resources, Raising Resilient Children. They call it owning it. I know it's kind of a psychobabble jargon kind of thing. But when you internalize an expectation, then they're not doing it to make you happy. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and it's much more grown up. If you do discipline coldly, it'll turn around and bite you in the butt. It'll undermine your relationship and your children will hate you. But if you do it warmly, you create intimacy. So permissive parenting close-up. Many of us have been in this position. It's a bit of an exaggeration for permissive parenting. Often a lot of permissive parents, especially in the 21st century, tend to be disproportionately vegetarian and and very much about not wanting to prune a child too much. They're very sensitive and very, very well-intentioned. The difficulty is that the message is telling the child, I don't expect much of you in terms of self-regulation and control. So there's not really teaching the child to be cooperative, to reach beyond themselves, to have more empathy with other children, although they may have more so with animals. Nor to lead very well, actually, because part of leading is about taking other people's needs into considerations. And the uninvolved parenting style, more like, it's much more neglectful. It's much more on the abusive end of the scale. And children are at the highest risk of being properly neglected here, improperly as the case may be. And of course, the message is teaching a child how to live life unloved, which I don't think is something any of us want to teach our children. So the question for you is, what's your general parenting style? But there's something else, because when we're under-resourced and we're under pressure, or we're feeling the stress, we may not be able to do our own ideals. So the next question is, what happens when you're under that pressure? What do you resort to that's not quite what you would prefer? So I would like to give you all a minute to talk with each other about that, with the honesty and grace that you can muster up. I'll confess that I resort to authoritarian styles when I fall into this. You might be interested to know what makes children misbehave. I've got 2 slides on this. It's not exhaustive, but it's just a good start. First of all, just being kids, you may not know this, but the brain function, the brain structure associated with the functions of emotional self-regulation are not actually fully up and running online until early 20s. They just can't do it. Much later. Some never. So when they're tired and hungry and overwhelmed and just under-resourced, they just haven't got the internal mechanisms involved to cope. Sometimes they just don't know how to do something, but often children with higher learning potential will be a bit proud. Say, nope, I'm going to figure this out, even if I break it or kill myself. They may have been asked to do something in a way that doesn't suit them. So they've been asked to, a learning style that doesn't suit them. For instance, memorize something rather than write it down or make a picture. This is, the next one is more subtle and can go into longer and broader term issues. Not feeling respected, listened to, understood, accepted, wanted even, loved. And that can come from the actual conversation mini dynamic that's happening in that tiny little teacup storm. Or it could be like the wind outside, something much more broadly contextual. And there's going to be anger and resentment in there. And if you think about people that you're angry with or resent, you're not very cooperatively inclined. So it's the same for children. There are people too, like Horton's, well, like Dr. Seuss said through Horton, a person's a person, no matter how small. And lack of appropriate boundaries. Both in the authoritarian style is overly rigid boundaries. For permissive and withholding, they're mushy, spongy, or absent. The picture there is obviously, well, to me obviously, not a child who's acting. That's a child who's in a rage, a very genuine rage. And you can see the issues involved in terms of needing to push people away and the potential for violence there. And it could be verbal violence as well. I'm sure your children have talked back to you at some point. More reasons for misbehaving. Now, the first one is very, very, yeah. The kids know, okay? And just because you're older, more experienced, and know a lot more doesn't mean you have anything to say about this thing right here. So sometimes they need a little bit of gentle reminding, compassionate reminding. Not seeing the point in doing the action. They need a buy-in. They need to be convinced it's worth their time because they're on a busy schedule, okay? Totally lost in their stress and overwhelmed, not having the emotional regulation management. And this is something that I've given workshops on specifically, and we can speak all weekend about this last one alone. Very innocent misunderstandings about the nature of thought, what's real in the world. So for instance, I was asked earlier, am I stressed? Because I've got these things. I was like, I don't do stress. That's not that I don't have pressures, it's that I don't do stress. Stress is about the nature of thinking. We don't have too much time to go into that, so unfortunately I can't, but the video is on wellbeingforschools.com. I've got this slide up here because I wanted to have a compassionate reminder for us all as very hardworking parents that it's not just us in the mix. There's choice at every layer of this model. This is from my PhD about explaining narratives of self. And of course, as the individual, And so for that child, there will be their biology, it will be their personal opinions, or what they think are their personal opinions, the relationships, immediate family, people at school, or homeschooling with other homeschoolers, the nature of the home, the community, and community and society also now kind of includes the internet, and community also includes school and different activities that they do, and the parents that they have contact with, and the parenting that they have exposure to, and society as a whole, the kind of billboards, adverts, sugary cereal commercials, and those sorts of things. So it's not just down to us. There's a lot that we're taking care of. So even though it's not about us parenting them, it's just about some compassion for the limits on how much we can do, and to be mindful of what we need to compensate for sometimes as best as we can. Now, the parenting styles are one axis of looking at it. Here's another one, reactive and proactive. And they're independent. Someone could be democratic and reactive, or democratic and proactive. And reactive parenting is like, I don't like that, let's do something about that now, or plan for the future now. And proactive is thinking, you're right, we've got this coming up, what are we going to do about it? Or I can see that we're going to hit this kind of tailspin coming up next year when she goes back to school or whatever. What are we going to do about it? What plans can we make for it? Most people are a bit of a mix. But I'm wondering, again, where are you? And this is an important one because it can really help your family move together if you can move to more proactive, balanced parenting, obviously. So I'd like you all to talk amongst yourselves again for a minute. It may not be as obvious. And what I was going to say is, of course, actually we need a balance because the unexpected will always come up anyway, no matter how well we plan. And then it's very real and right in front of us. And then we have to cope with it and think about, is this likely to happen again, and do risk assessment and project planning. And, but in the main, there are some things that we can anticipate, like dating.
That's never going to happen.
I know the feeling. Happy Family Blueprint. We're not going to spend too much time on this because there's a lot more to discuss as well. All happy families are alike, so the saying goes. Each unhappy family is unhappy in their own distinctly individual way. Leo Tolstoy, For families that are happy, studies done on happy families show that they have a lot of things in common. And one of that is being kind to each other and being kindly disposed. There are values of kindness involved. For the next one, that's not from the research on happy families, that's from another area of expertise around the nature of thought and reality. If I'm taking responsibility for my feelings, then nobody can make me angry, which is very useful for keeping the family peace if everyone's holding responsibility for that. And it's a massive jump, and it takes a long time to teach kids that. The workshop is online. It's actually easier to learn than one might think. It's more like, it's really common sense when you really look through the arguments of it, but then living it is something else. Accountability. And that's for 360-degree accountability for those in healthier organizations. That I, as a parent, as a manager, am accountable to the people I manage, my staff, my child. And so I get reviews, as does she. So we're all accountable. And we check in with each other, both formally and informally. I actually, we as a family, we get our parenting MOT'd about once a year. Seriously. We go to someone who says, okay, how are you doing? What can we improve? Like going to management improvement classes, right? Well, there's an assumption that parenting is natural, by the way, but it ain't. Attachment's natural, but that's what I'll be speaking about in the workshop this afternoon. Communicating well with each other. I know well is very fuzzy, but the thing is that there's a range of what's right for different families, even within the typical happy family blueprint. So some people are much more like open and processing. You know, I'm a Jewish New Yorker with over 20 years of therapy, and I thought you can imagine the conversations we have in our home. You know, so For other families, there isn't as much emotional focus in that way, but there's still an openness, and the degree of openness that's right for your family is important to get to. Addressing all the child's needs, not just academic, but all of them. Treating each other with respect, and this has to do with couple dynamics as well. In order to parent a child well, the parents, ideally, for a child to get the best possible childhood experience, the parents need to be a team and respecting one another. One parent can't be like slagging off the other and then expect to be an ideal parent. It doesn't work that way. It tears the kid apart. A balance of authority and independence, which is age appropriate and will move along. Encouragement and praise that's specific and earned, not invented. That's also very important. Effective conflict resolution processes for everybody. And again, so if there's a family of 3 like we are, there's Sasha and I, there's Aaliyah and Sasha, there's Aaliyah and me, and then the family together. So there's a lot of conflict resolution patterns and habits and processes to get on board, even with just a minimal parents and child family. Okay, so we get a drink of water. Yes. Family values and priorities. One of the ways to come together as a team is by knowing what's important to you as a family. For some people, it's being really hardworking. For others, it's being really honest. For other families, it might be keeping promises, being reliable. Or it could be many things for a family. And so what's important to you as a family is something that you convey. And how much better that's done if it's done consciously. The thing is, of course, is that you might not all share the same priorities and your values. So that's important to know as well. And even though there may be role splits within the family, somebody might be more caretaking, spend more time at home, which could be either the mom or dad, especially in the 21st century. One might be more outside in the world of the public sort of thing. And yet, there's common ground. So it's important to see where there's common ground and where there isn't and why there isn't, and how that gets played out at home. So it's important for you to know your family values and to prioritize them. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do, there's one more slide and then I'll be asking you to do an exercise. So very quickly, living congruent with your values is right in the middle of that. It really, being a happy family and parenting children with higher learning potential, being as intense and full-on as it is, really needs persistent, conscious action. Whenever I teach anything, it's hammering in the practice. Parenting is a practice, like yoga, like meditation, like being in a couple. It's a practice. So I'll give you 2 minutes for this, actually. What are your family values, and where are the gaps? Where are the inconsistencies? We've begun to have a couple talk about that as well. So please talk amongst yourselves. Give you 2 minutes for that one, as I should have been doing all along. It's lovely to hear. We do family meetings very regularly. It's a book by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. Very high recommend. It talks a lot about the structure of family meetings, how to do them, and it starts off with a mission statement, which talks about collectively figuring out what your values are, maybe more what you want them to be or what's wind up being expressed. So yes, it should more have been, as far as you can tell without your children here. Thank you so much for that, and how lovely to have it as a first comment. Critical thinking here, but also room for improvement, perhaps. Okay. For Sasha and I, the disjuncture isn't in the values, but sometimes in the prioritizing of them. So he might prioritize hard work, must study. He comes from a background where him studying mathematics saved him from having to go to Chechnya. So it was a really like studying math, life or death situation. But I don't often see it quite so intensely. And so I'll tell him more, come on, back up, she's tired. And he'll be like, no, she really has to prepare. So it's more prioritizing for us where we can get stuck. So that's another issue. Not just the values, but how they get prioritized moment to moment in the daily hurly-burly of everyday life. I love that quote. Because of their size, parents may be difficult to discipline properly. So specifically, again, children with higher learning potential, what they'll most favorably respond to is a democratic, authoritative rather than authoritarian style. Because they may be inclined to be cooperative, but not at all obedient. And they also really want to be grown up really fast. So that style of being included, like in having family meetings, really is something that tends to resonate with a lot of higher learning potential kids. Appealing to their sense of justice and logic, but within the context of that warmth, accepting and knowing that logic is not the be-all and end-all of communication. Allowing room to question everything, often repeatedly. It needs more time. Parenting HLP kids is time consumptive, isn't it? You need to make the time for it. Otherwise, they wind up, cutting corners, and it just doesn't work for them. They're special needs kids, as far as I'm concerned. And get off with basic thinking errors, because children, bless them, will often get the very wrong, pointy end of the stick. And helping them unpick the illogic in what seems straightforward and obvious to them is very important. So I believe there was something on BBC about logic. Any of you see that? It might still be up. It's really, really cool. It talks about there are over 200 different syllogisms, only of which 19 are actually valid. So understanding when your children are getting confused is very useful. Also in terms of the basic thought errors from cognitive behavioral therapy. So for instance, things like catastrophizing and overgeneralizing. Like, because this happened, this thing will never happen or will always happen. And questioning that kind of illogic is also very important. In the workshop this afternoon, I'll be going over a few of them, though not very many. There are problem areas, like homework. Yeah, sure that was going to ring a few bells. And I love Calvin and problems. Calvin is a higher learning potential kid, isn't he? Who doesn't really get that recognized by his parents very well. So I'm particularly fond of Calvin. Okay, so it's about pre-agreeing. Not when they're in the midst of it, because that's really pointless. But pre-agreeing with your family meetings, really clear on what your values are and why things are being done, allowing multiple times to question, why do it? It's a waste of my time. Or whatever it is. Being clear about what the plan is going forward and what the consequences are. So if we pre-agreed for Aaliyah, okay, she doesn't do that, that'll be like turn off lights. So if she forgets to turn off the lights, that's 20p. She knows it. She's agreed to it. She came up with the number. So the compliance with it is much more likely. And also context, also very, very important. I don't know about you, but we had massive struggles with our schools until we found the right one. So homework was really a big issue. But also, do you have legitimate authority to say do your homework? Because the only legitimate authority in the parenting styles, quite frankly, is the authoritative one, the democratic one. All the others are about the parents' insecurities and their overwhelm and their coping. The other locations of identity and influences that we spoke about in the ecological model. What's going on in that child's life that makes homework not something they want to do? Is it really uncool to do well? And larger issues around it. Are they being bullied? Where? So it's a big deal, and not something you can just deal with once you're on the kitchen table and have the assignment out. It's too late. We're going to skip this slide so I can get more to the NLP tips. But to check out how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. It's a nonviolent communication-based book. I really high recommend. It's got cartoons in it, and the cartoons are so explicit and so simple that my daughter has been giving me a 360 review, and Sasha, for years based on these cartoons. Really useful handbook for big and little people alike. And a nice way for you to cheaply do your own 360 review. There's brilliant parenting advice in there. Also, the 5 love languages. Have you ever heard of these before? So if you have, yeah, many know. The 5 love languages, very simplistic presentation by Gary Chapman, but really, really interesting. So that there are 5 ways that people feel and give love, and they tend to give it in the way that they feel it, which makes sense. So if someone's much more verbal on it, words of affirmation, then they'll say, I love you. They'll say you look great in that. They'll say thank you. But someone who's more into gifts, all those words will just fly over their head. Where's the gift? And little children tend to be more gift-oriented. Some of them outgrow it, again, some people never. But our daughter is very much, she's all of them, but she's also very much a gifts child. So if we didn't give her little rubber bands or autumn leaves and things like that, she'd grow up to 16 and feel unloved, for heaven's sake. You have to communicate with your child in the languages that are appropriate for them, and they aren't always verbal. Acts of service. There was couples as well. There's some recent research done showed that people doing each other favors, the cup of tea, even in America it was tea, not coffee, that couples who make each other cups of tea tend to have much healthier relationships. And so people might seize upon the cup of tea as the issue, but it's actually about being kind to one another and doing acts of service. Yes? Somebody said, yeah, we make tea. I'll be making a lot more tea, baby. Quality time. Yeah? So Sasha and I live together, we work together, but we can get to the end of the day not having spent 10 minutes of quality time with each other. It's not just proximity, it's about the connection and intimacy. Physical touch, obviously appropriate. Hugs, cuddles, strokes, pats on the shoulder as you go by. Again, some people, they can really do without it, thank you very much. Other people just absolutely crave it all the time. My daughter is a no-kiss, just hug person. So it's very specific. But finding that out can be a wonderful journey. And of course, if a child is getting enough cuddles and enough cups of herbal tea, without sugar, I guess, then they're more likely to listen to you later. Again, it's all the web, it all comes together. It's not like one thing you can do and you'd be like the best parent on earth. It's a practice. Like yoga, one asana is not going to make you a yogi, no matter how beautifully, bless you, you do that one asana. You have to do a lot and often. So Neuro-Linguistic Programming, fun there. NLP. NLP is about the way we learn, the way we think, about the structure of the way we think, about the way we connect, and also, of course, about the way we teach. So NLP can be very highly effective if you know what you're doing, and effective in negative ways if you don't. It's really underused, and Sasha and I were talking about this. I wanted to focus on this in the keynote lecture because you may have really good access to other kinds of parenting tips and materials, but NLP is so underused and so underutilized. And to point out that NLP it can be considered to overlap quite a bit with cognitive behavioral interventions. And cognitive behavioral stuff is really, really quality stuff. It really works in the ways that it does. So I'm going to give you 10 ways that this stuff can be really helpful with parenting. So because it's also about thinking and feelings are one side of the same, or two sides of really the same coin. I think of them as so enmeshed, I think of them as one side of the same coin, which doesn't make any sense, but there you go. And so NLP is also about managing state, managing emotions. So what is it like talking to you when you are just, is somebody going to win an argument with you? No hands going up. That's right. The same with our kids. Remember, a person's a person, no matter how small. And their emotional regulation doesn't come up till the 20s or never. Yeah? So just stop. Just stop. Back off. This is pointless. Next. Something called, the technical term is meta-modeling. Pardon. It's about logic and specifics and challenging. It's fantastic. The cartoon here is, Jim's hurting my feelings. How specifically is Jim hurting your feelings? Because hurting is too general. You don't know what's going on yet. So that's called the deletion of an unspecified verb. But there are many, many, many more structures involved. So why do they say they hate it? Because it's a full rejection. Why is that? Get curious. Really always? Is that true? Never? Is that true? So also getting specifics about the future and future planning. What would make this the best birthday party ever? Getting specific. You get more of what you focus on. So focus on what you want, right? Give specific praise, not just well done, but well done for making your bed this morning. Well done for getting dressed in under half an hour. Thank yous go a really long way with children as well. Because when you say thank you for doing that, you've got the praise already embedded in. It's a shorthand way, a quick way of doing it. Oh, thanks for bringing your plate into the kitchen. And never mind what they're supposed to do. But also, if your partner is a words of affirmation person, again, the thank yous can go a really long way, as far as a cup of tea, I'm sure. Now also, you get more of what you focus on. So don't focus on what you don't want. Don't think of a pink elephant. Don't torture your little brother. Don't run down the shopping aisle. Don't forget to brush your teeth. That's conversational hypnosis into forgetting. Don't forget your homework. Okay, Mom. What are you asking your kid to do? Pardon? Yeah, it's really easy, but you have to be conscious of it. So sometimes I'll find myself saying, oh, don't blah, 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 and then I'll catch myself and say, oh yeah, say what I want. So then I'll repeat it, but switching it around in that way. So it's not too late if you tell your children what you don't want. Just end on the good note. Someone who played jazz once showed me this, actually. He was doing a riff, and he put a duff note in the middle, and it was forgivable, and he got to the end, and it was lovely. And then he did another one where he ended it on a duff note. Oh, it was awful. It's a really big difference. So feel free to correct yourself and end on that lovely note. More NLP tests. Okay. Avoid using but or however. You ever have someone tell you, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but. Instant defensiveness, suspicion, wariness. The but doesn't help you when you speak to your children either. Or however. The subconscious mind just deletes everything or creates boundaries against it. On guard. You did great on that test, but. How to undermine a child's self-esteem 101. Accidentally, well-intentioned parents do these things. It doesn't have to be you anymore. So the next one is about submodalities. And that's again another technical term for just our senses. So this is really especially good for nightmares, working with nightmares. So if someone's had a nightmare full of rich images that are horrible, turn the contrast up or down so the images goes really light or black, and push the image far away. And then you need to visualize where's the image going to go. If there were sounds, either dim the sounds down or make them funny, change them. You're working with the different senses this way. Does that make sense? Pardon? Sure. So again, the slides will be up, but sure. So when my daughter woke up in sweaty, screaming terror that the world was going to end because the sun was expanding, because its sun has a limited lifespan, and it's going to inflate, and yeah. So we said, okay, let's shrink the sun down. Let's move the sun farther away again. Let's turn its color from red. It's not a red giant anymore. It's going to turn into the nice yellow star that we remember. So we work with that submodality. Yeah? And so that's a very, very specific. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah. So sometimes with sounds as well. So if they were chased by a big scary robot, then okay, make the robot really little, give it a teeny little voice and its hammers. You know, things like that. And also, parenting and play acting and role playing and these things, they really go hand in hand as well. So, you know, the more you get involved in it as well, the more you convey it and the more your kids will get it. Yeah? And the more they'll have fun with it, because once they start laughing, they've already changed state, they're not scared anymore. Helium voices are great for scary voices. Conversational hypnosis. We do it all the time. You cannot not use conversational hypnosis. So since you're using it, you may as well use it wisely. So in our recent experience with the Child Genius competition, someone very well-intended said, oh, I know you're all really nervous and feeling your hearts beat faster and maybe even like really sweating. And Sasha's creasing himself in the back, like hypnotizing the children to be terrified. It's not what she wanted to do, but it's what she was doing because she doesn't know NLP. These are really basic things to know. So be aware of when you're hypnotizing your children. When a kid says, I can't, well, what if you could? It immediately sends the subconscious mind into like, find out what I could do, find out what I could do, find out how it could be done. It's very computer-like in some ways, the subconscious mind. It's absolutely lovely. And it can be your ally. Yes? Focus on what you want. So since this one is loaded with linguistic, conversational, hypnotic language patterns, as you start paying attention to what I'm saying, you may notice that it's even easier already to think about doing your homework. So there's not as you start paying attention, because you get a yes, it's pace, pace, lead. You get a lot of yeses out of it. And there's nothing in there. Aren't you listening to what I'm saying? Is a lot more than as you start listening. It's easier to take in. So you can use patterns in particular ways to make it easier for your children to hear you. Did you have a question? I'm sorry? Overlapping with, because this is about the art of delivery. There are different ways of suggesting things, of course, but with NLP, you can be much more artful and masterful with your delivery. And of course you don't need to feel sleepy now. That has an embedded command in it. You feel sleepy now. What would it be like? So I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just making a mere humble suggestion. What would it be like to just rest your eyes? That's more useful than get to sleep already. It's a lot to take on board and to learn, but these are a few things you can look into it further. But to begin to be aware for when you're hypnotizing your children. We all do it. Again, we cannot not do it. It can be fascinating just to look for embedded commands. You can make it like embedded command week and look at advertisements and your own languaging, like everywhere. You can, when you're working with submodalities, you can like look at when children or big people move their eyes back and forth, that's more auditory. When they're looking down, that's more kinesthetic. When they're looking up, that's visual. You can watch for it in your children to figure out what are their favorite ways of thinking and learning. It's really beautiful stuff. I have 10 altogether. Future pace your child, timelining, it's called. So if there's something that they want, imagine they've already got it. So you can even do it if you've got enough space, or in a shorter walk if you have less space. So okay, you're standing here, and there is where you've already achieved what you want to achieve. Look forward and slowly walk your way through. Really feel what that's like. Step over any obstacles, or move through them. Have fun with it. And then when you get to where you go, look back and say, okay, what was the most useful thing I did in there? What can I tell my past self was the best way that I did that? It's really cool, because it's about imagination. And of course, higher learning potential kids tend to be alive with that. So use their strengths on their behalf. 9 is about empathy. It's called second positioning. There's also third positioning and meta positioning, but at least second positioning is stepping into someone else's shoes. As you can imagine them, you could talk them through. Okay, step into their little size shoes or those bigger size shoes. Yeah? And make it an exercise instead of just a saying. The last step is what I started to mention earlier. It's really important that if you want your child to learn something, the best way, easiest way they're going to take that in is the way that they're most comfortable doing so. It seems really obvious, but how many of you already know whether your child tends to be more visual, kinesthetic? So there's a lot to learn about our kids. And it's like, and one of the classic mistakes of NLP is they see their child this is in the training, it happens a lot with really poor NLP training. They might notice someone look up, say, oh, she's a visual person. But I don't know anybody who's completely visual when they're testing water in a hot bath. So it can change from one to another depending on context or circumstance. So it's complex. Nobody is a visual person. They can have a tendency to be more visual, but to be alert to when that is and how that changes. Yeah? If you're not sure what your child is like, ask them questions to see what happens. What would you like to, if you were going to figure something out, would you like to draw it out? Would you like to talk it out? Would you want to just look at it in your head? You want to kind of get a feel for it? It's reflected in the language as well. Do you get something, or do you hear it, or do you see it? So those kind of little linguistic things will give away which modality the person tends to work in. And once you really see it, it's really cool. It's like you hear it and you see it, and it's like this whole other layer of the world is alive to you. It's really lovely. Any questions, issues, responses, elaborations required? So if you have a different learning style, yeah, I'll repeat it. So if you have a different learning style from your child, which can of course be very difficult, the thing is that the child can't do it the way you do it. You have to do it the way your child does it. So you're the one that has to make the stretch. So same thing for the love languages for our daughter. Sasha and I are not gifts people at all. If we never bought each other a gift the rest of our lives, we wouldn't even notice. But it's so important for our daughter that we've made it something that we're aware of for her. We have to step into her world because we're the big people. That's it. It's a tough job. Parenting is a tough job. Neuro-Linguistic Programming comes from Bandler and Grinder, these two guys who got together and did loads of interviewing with the top therapists of the day. Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, Milton Erickson, I'm not sure, maybe a few others, and found out what they were already doing. Because like I said, you can't not use. I think one of the reasons it's underused is people don't realize how awesome it is and are put off by how technical it is. Question. I think one of the difficulty is that I don't know if you've ever had it, but you ever walk into a really, really, really messy room and someone says, I don't know where to start? And so in some way it doesn't matter where you start. As long as whatever you pick up, you deal with that one thing. Just make room for one thing at a time and start expanding it. So for instance, if you were to do family meetings, then first of all, you might want to get Stephen Covey's book and read it. So it might be a couple of months before you can begin to have it, because it might take both partners that long to get through the book, or skim it or whatever, or look online and see the resources. And then, okay, let's plan our first family meeting. And no matter how badly it goes, we're going to have another one. Just make that pre-commitment, because it needs persistence. I've spoken about yoga a few times. I'm really bad at yoga, but I still do it. because I know that if I just keep on doing it, it will get easier. And it is, but very, very slowly. It's not a natural thing for me. It's about being persistent. And the thing is that we all make time for what's important to us. How many of you brushed your teeth this morning? I did. Put on deodorant? Any number of other things as well. How many of you ever get so rushed you don't brush your teeth or do proper personal hygiene? Few people admit it. You make time for what's important to you. So something's going to have to go. If you're going to bring in something else is going to have to fall out because you only have the same number of hours in a day as Bill Gates, right? He manages to, have a world empire with his time. I don't accomplish that much. But I do what I do in my own sphere of influence. So part of it's about time management, and part of it's about thinking about values and priorities. It may be that, let's talk about where we might want to start with this. And let's be gentle with ourselves and compassionate with ourselves and bring it in slowly. I can guarantee, though, that like with family meetings, it could be like, right, let's have a family meeting, whoosh, we start, and it's over in 15 minutes, or even 10 minutes. Because we're used to doing it now. And we have that structure in place in our families. So it's a lot harder at first, but it gets easier. It's easy to get caught up in the overwhelm of, like I was saying, these things all mesh together. But you can't just change everything all at once. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot of research on weight loss and quitting cigarette smoking and things like that speak to this very issue about how do you change your lives? And that is one thing at a time, and that one thing well. Right. Okay. So when you say parenting styles, do you really mean styles? Like, are you more authoritarian one and more authoritative with another?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Some of that. I obviously when I was younger, so the expectations are slightly different. So
Of course.
The other one needs to understand that. But we get a lot of issues around what is fair and what is not fair.
Especially with kids with higher learning potential, is an immense sensitivity to justice. So, what...
Is that an issue then? Maybe I should use the same sort of both of them, maybe that's what's causing the unrest. But it's just I don't get the best out of either of them deploying the same method. So one is very sensitive. If I was to speak to her in a certain way, that would be upsetting. If I was to speak to the other one in a sensitive way, I'd get no listen to me. So I get a lot of fairness issues.
So yeah, family meetings and over time and working out how it's going to happen. It's sometimes called a democratic style, but it's not, is it? We're not a democracy here. At the end of the day, what I say goes, and that's it. And because I'm relentlessly persistent, Sasha as well, relentlessly persistent and consistent with the boundaries, as well as consequences. So there was one time, for instance, where Aliyah was meant to, she had got 10, 15 minutes of math homework to do, and she took so long to do it that the people were coming over for the afternoon play date. We had an afternoon excursion plan. We said, well, look, your deal was to do your math homework this morning, or you don't go. So she didn't go. We canceled the outing. I was with a new friend, and it actually wound up very sadly damaging the relationship with that family. But we stuck to our boundaries. Both kids were really upset about it, and I don't blame them, but Aliyah was the one that didn't keep her word. So really being able to hold to consequences and agreeing to consequences, but getting their buy-in. Even very little children, Stephen Covey talks about this as well, even very little children can come up with their own consequences. Often you'll find that children will have much harsher consequences than you would ever dream of. So I'll have to talk them down from it, which can actually be very nice for your relationship as well. It's like, I got off easy on this one. Phew. So but it takes work to come together on it, to come to the congruency. It seems to make sense that there would be accusations of unfairness with drastically different styles. So first is that it's more than one conversation. This will have to be the last question, I'm sorry. It's more than one conversation, because relationship with intelligences and capacities are about relationship with the self. Relationships are in procedural memory, which is like, you learned how to eat a fork, not by reading about it and doing it, but by practicing it. You learned how to walk by doing it. Same with relationship with self. Relationship with these capacities is learned over time. So it's informed by values. So whatever age-appropriate way, it's like you have these greater abilities than other people, and that's just the fact of it. It doesn't make you a better person. There are loads of people who can think as well or even smarter than you, but are not very nice at all, and you wouldn't want to spend any time with them. And other people that are smarter than you that are awesome to be with and awesome to play with. So it's just an independent variable. And his goodness has nothing to do with it. And also, coaching them is like, yep, it's more likely to make it harder to find people that are easy to talk to without hypnotizing them into isolation, but acknowledging it as an issue. And more dealing with the negative sides of it as it comes up. It is more like being aware of it over time and contextualizing it within the values that are right for you. I remember sitting down with Aaliyah, we looked up census data as well. Okay, you're a genius, that means technically you're in the top 2%, which means that when you live in this town, there'll be this many, X many other children in the top 2%. There are only this many kids at your school, how likely is it that you'll meet any? And so this was when she was what, Sasha, 6 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about this stuff from her from pretty young as well. And I think we are due to end. So I would like to thank you all so much for coming and being here. Absolute pleasure and honor to be with you, and hope to see you again over the weekend. Take care.